So with that, I'm joined by Mr. Adam Cheshire, our Program Administrator for Homeless Initiatives. The more people see you, the more calls you're going to get, Adam, so I hope your phone is ready.
Don't I know it?
So my first question is, how does the issue around housing affordability and homelessness, how does that intersect with the other issues we're going to be talking about today, whether it's public safety, education, economic development?
Well, it's a great question and because it really gets to the root of the complexity of homelessness itself, the problem of homelessness, and the complexity of the solutions to homelessness. So, as an example, someone makes the biggest mistake of their life and end up getting involved in the criminal justice system. As a result, as a consequence, they lose their job. Maybe they were already living paycheck to paycheck, so the next thing you know, they're on the street. Statistically, within about 30 days, the chances of them rehousing, getting into housing on their own is very, very slim without serious support, without serious resources behind that. So if we can improve outcomes in public safety, in economic development, in education, in all of these things, because of that intersection, it's going to improve outcomes for the homeless. And so it's sort of that theory of a rising tide raises all ships.
And let me backtrack a little bit so you can say, because I probably have all type of crazy things I want you to do and say your job title is. So for the public, what's your job title? What are your responsibilities?
So my official job title is Program Administrator for Homeless Initiatives, which I realize is a mouthful. So if you want to call me Czar, I have no problem with that.
Czar.
That's fine. And so my role is very much to be kind of broadly the focal point for coordination of services, of funding. Right now, we are, when I say we, I mean myself, Supervisor Miller, and a lot of people that have been involved in the Homelessness Task Force for a long time are involved in an effort to transition that task force into an expanded, what's called a continuum of care. And there's funding associated with that continuum, and it is very much the forum where these kinds of conversations around solutions to homelessness are going to happen. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to be able to be at the center of that and to have that opportunity to move that forward.
Okay, Czar, what's the biggest issue facing homeless individuals in our city and county?
Housing.
Housing. Can you speak more to that?
So plain and simple.
That makes sense, right? You're homeless because you don't have housing. So I get it.
And if you want less homeless, you need more homes. And not to minimize the issue, because it's a very complex problem. But we know how difficult it is to find housing in Stockton, in San Joaquin County. We know how expensive it is. Being adjacent to the hottest real estate market in the country, it really does have an effect here. And so for someone who is using what's called a housing choice voucher, used to be called Section 8, subsidized rent, it can be very difficult to find a home when a landlord doesn't want to rent to you because for that very fact that you are subsidized. And that's really the only way you're going to get in. Well, then, so we have this cycle where people just simply can't get housing. We need more housing, and I think we need to support the folks that are really doing the hard work, the good work in our community to make affordable housing happen. That's Peter Ragsdale at the Housing Authority of the County of San Joaquin. It's Fred Scheel at STAND. It's Bill Mendelson at Central Valley Low Income Housing Corporation, Carol Ornelas at Visionary Home Builders, and there's others. We as a society, as a community, as policymakers need to support those efforts because that is ultimately the real path forward to get the chronically homeless off the streets.
And I'm glad you raised that point, because I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but for the last 2 quarters, Stockton has actually had the fastest rising rent market in the country. And I don't know if your wages have risen that fast, but mine haven't. Meaning that a lot of people are paying more and more for the same things they had and have less and less to do other things. And the amount of calls I get from people who are facing eviction or are going to be evicted or have been evicted, it's nearing an epidemic, and not to be dramatic. And to that end, we've just established a mayor's task force on housing and housing affordability with many of those folks you mentioned that I think will be a perfect complement to the work of the housing task force to transition to continuum of care. So then can you also speak a little bit about in a lot of the research, it talks about this housing first idea. Like if you want to end homelessness or chronic homelessness or reduce homelessness, you have to do housing first. So can you give me a couple sentences on what that is? But then number two, how difficult it is to get there.
To get to a housing first
Solution, because I would imagine it's expensive.
Well, yeah, it can be. It's less expensive than the solutions that we have right now, which are, picking people up off the street, putting them in jail, sending them to the emergency room over and over again. It's tough out there, and so putting someone into housing tends to solve those problems. It tends to stabilize someone so that they aren't getting involved in the criminal justice system as much, or hopefully at all. They aren't having to go to the emergency room over and over again. Maybe they have access to medical care. Housing first is controversial because it's about providing housing first over all other concerns. The idea being that until you are in housing, you aren't going to be able to solve the other problems. You aren't going to be able to get treatment for your mental health issue or your substance abuse issue. You aren't going to be able to, go out and look for a job. I mean, can you imagine how difficult that would be without a home? But that is sometimes the expectation. So while housing first is controversial, it's also really, it seems to be the direction that we're going. The state of California has adopted a housing first model, and so a lot of the funding that is, and there's a lot of funding coming from the state of California right now for homeless initiatives. A lot of that funding is tied to housing first, so you're going to have to demonstrate that your program is a housing first model in order to access those funds.
Well, I'm all in for housing first.
Glad
I
to
think
hear
I just want to figure out, that's why you're hired, how do we do it? And I know we don't have to discuss it in the 3 minutes we have left,
Okay.
but I think over the next couple of years,
We're working on
we'll
it.
get there. And then my last question would be, people want to help. I think in Stockton we're blessed with people who want to be civically engaged and who are always, I know my mom makes me collect toiletries when I go to hotels and like socks and things to pass out. And I'm like, give it to the shelter. But she's like, no, I want to give it to the people. So how can we be most helpful? Because I think oftentimes our impulse to help may cause some unintended harms. So from your vantage point as someone who ran a shelter, is now the program administrator, what can we do if I'm a pastor of a church, if I'm a community member, if I have a bunch of people who are volunteering, what can I do to really help be part of a strategy to help folks who happen to be homeless?
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned that continuum of care, and I really believe in that effort. And there are communities all across the United States that are establishing continuums of care or have them established. And again, it is the forum where those conversations happen, where the collaboration happens. And it isn't reserved to folks like me or folks like you. It is it is open to everyone. And so the folks that are in the churches, or your mom or your family, anyone can show up that has an interest in making a difference in the lives of the homeless and lend their voice to the solution.
When are those meetings?
So we happen to have a task force meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock at the Family Resource and Referral Center. It's open to the public, and as we transition into the continuum of care, those meetings will continue to happen once a month and be called the continuum of care. The public can get involved in that way, and I get asked all the time. Ever since I started the shelter, I got asked, should I give money to panhandlers? And my answer is, if that's what your heart tells you to do, then yes. It may not be the best use of your money. It may not go to where you think it should, but then that's the choice you're making. If you feel like maybe that's not the right choice, then you should consider supporting an organization in Stockton, in San Joaquin County, that is making a difference, because there's a lot of good organizations out there. So call Stockton Shelter for the Homeless and find out how to volunteer, and maybe go to their website and donate a little money. Call up St. Mary's Dining Room and see what you can do to volunteer to serve food. And there's so many other organizations. I mean, I could go on and on. Really supporting those organizations who are the steward of the resources that we have, the limited funds that we have to help the homeless and move this solution forward. I think that's the best thing anybody in this community can do.
Well, Adam, we're so excited to have you in your new role. We look forward to working very closely with you, and I hope 1,000 people figure out how to help the homeless by working with our shelters or attending continuum of care meetings, because it's really going to take all of us to deal with the homeless issue, because to the first question we talked about, it's not just an issue of homeless individuals. It's an issue of housing affordability. In some cases, it's an issue of substance abuse. In some cases, it's an issue of post-traumatic stress disorder and mental illness. In some cases, it's the intersection of all those things. So it's going to take all of us to really put a dent in it. But I'm happy to have you leading the charge, and thank you for joining tonight.
Thank you.